In the heart of the galaxy, within the cold, towering chambers of the Galactic Council, the fate of humanity stood on trial. The Great Hall was a place of judgment, carved from a moon-sized asteroid and floating silently above the gas giant Vale Taurus. Around the circular arena, representatives of over 200 alien species sat in silence, their glowing eyes fixed on the lone figure standing at the center, Ambassador Reiko Sato, Earth's final voice. She stood tall, not with arrogance, but with the quiet strength of someone carrying the weight of billions. Her suit, simple and elegant, reflected the pale light of the chamber's floating orbs. The air was thick with tension, and though no weapons were allowed inside, every word spoken felt as sharp as a blade. A towering insectoid judge, speaking on behalf of the council, read out the charges in a deep, distorted voice: unauthorized expansion into neutral zones, refusal to share technological discoveries, and the most serious disrupting the balance of galactic harmony. Sato listened, her face calm, her hands folded, her thoughts racing. She had known this day would come. Humanity had risen too fast, advanced too far, and made too many enemies. Where other species evolved over millennia with council guidance, humans had leapt forward in mere centuries, unlocking faster than light travel, terraforming dead worlds, and creating machines that could think. Their creativity and defiance made them dangerous in the eyes of the old empires. But Sato was not here to beg. She was here to remind them who humans were. When her time came to speak, the entire chamber quieted as if the galaxy itself held its breath. Her voice echoed clearly, not just through the hall, but through countless screens across dozens of council worlds. We brought life to empty planets. We healed worlds dying from war and disease. We shared food, knowledge, and medicine. And yes, we built things you could not predict. But that does not make us criminals. It makes us human. Her words were powerful, honest, and aimed not at the leaders before her, but at the species watching beyond these walls, those who had been helped by Earth, those who remembered the kindness and bravery of human explorers. Still, the Council had already made its decision long before her arrival. Sato could see it in their eyes: fear, envy, and the cold satisfaction of cutting down a rising rival. After a brief deliberation that felt more like a ceremony than a true debate, the verdict was spoken. Earth was to be exiled from all interstellar alliances, forbidden from accessing Council wormholes, banned from trade, and stripped of its status as a recognized species. Earth was to be alone once again, as it had been in the ancient past. The Council turned away, ending the session with ceremonial indifference. Sato stood frozen for a moment, her face unreadable. But inside, something ancient stirred, something that had carried humanity through every dark age and disaster: the will to endure. Without a word, she turned and walked out of the chamber, her footsteps echoing through the marble-like floor. Behind her, the Council returned to their political games, convinced they had removed a threat. But they had only lit a fuse. As Sato's ship left Council space, she stared out at the stars, not with sorrow, but with determination. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire, not with despair, but with resolve. World leaders gathered in secret, military commanders dusted off forgotten plans, and scientists who once dreamed in peace now spoke of engines built for war. Humanity would not beg to return. Instead, they would do what they had always done best: adapt, survive, and build. They would not fade into silence. No, they would make the galaxy remember what it meant to cast Earth aside. And as the stars watched silently, humanity began to rise, not as a member of the Council, but as something new, something stronger, something the galaxy would never forget. 10 years had passed since Earth was exiled, and the galaxy had grown used to humanity's silence. The Galactic Council believed their decision had pushed humans back into isolation, into the shadows where primitive species belonged. Most thought Earth would collapse without access to trade, wormholes, and alliances, but they had all underestimated one thing: humanity's refusal to give up. Far from the borders of Council-controlled space, hidden behind dust clouds, black holes, and distorted space-time, Earth had launched a project so secret that even many humans didn't know its full scope. They called it the Phoenix Protocol, a silent plan that had been buried deep within Earth's military archives, waiting for the day they would no longer be welcome in the galaxy. It was not just a plan to survive, but to rebuild everything from scratch, better and stronger. Using stolen data, salvage technology, and the last of their interstellar reserves, humanity began colonizing rogue systems, abandoned planets, and asteroid belts far from the reach of the Council's eyes. These new colonies were not like the old ones. They were fast, self-sufficient, and powered by a breakthrough energy source known only to Earth's brightest minds, zero-point energy harvested from the quantum fabric of space itself. On a planet called New Alexandria, orbiting a red dwarf in an unmarked system, a new capital was born, one built underground, protected by stealth fields, and managed by sentient A's who had learned to think not only logically, but ethically. At the center of this reborn human empire stood Admiral Reiko Sato, no longer a diplomat. She walked through the towering halls of the command spire with quiet confidence, surrounded by holographic maps, shifting constellations, and updates from dozens of hidden human worlds. The air was calm, but tension lay beneath the surface. Humanity had grown faster than expected. In just a decade, Earth had founded over 30 self-reliant colonies, formed its own fleet of autonomous ships, and built a network of communication relays that couldn't be traced. But now, a signal had been intercepted, faint, encrypted, and coming from deep within Council territory. It was a distress call from a species known as the Valari, a once proud civilization now reduced to slave labor by Council powers. Their worlds were dying due to a mining accident caused by Council negligence, but no help had arrived. They had sent the signal not to the Council, but directly to Earth. Somehow, they knew. Sato played the message over and over, the broken voice of a Valari elder begging not for salvation, but for dignity in death. Around her, Earth's commanders debated the response. Some warned it was a trap, a clever ploy to lure humanity into open conflict. Others argued that helping would expose their entire empire before it was ready. But Sato had already made up her mind. Humanity could not rise by standing on the sidelines. They had been exiled for daring to dream. Now they would act not for revenge, but for something greater. Orders were given. 3 fleets silent, invisible, and armed with the most advanced technology Earth had ever created were dispatched to the Valari system. They moved through uncharted paths, slipping between stars like shadows. On board the lead ship, the ISS Deliverance, Captain Arun Malik reviewed the rescue protocols, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. They were not just saving a dying race, they were showing the galaxy that humanity had returned, not as destroyers, but as defenders. When the fleets arrived, the Valari world was worse than expected. Giant mining platforms had cracked the crust of the planet. Council security forces patrolled the skies, enforcing order with brutality. The humans watched from orbit, their ships hidden, silently observing. Then, with precise timing and surgical coordination, the human fleet moved. Drones swarmed the sky, disabling enemy systems without killing. Drop pods landed with engineers, medics, and robotic units to stabilize the planet's core and clean the air. Council ships tried to fight back, but they were overwhelmed not by firepower alone, but by tactics they didn't understand. In under 12 hours, the Valari were freed, the Council's forces captured or routed, and not a single human civilian lost. Word spread like wildfire through the stars. A race forgotten by the Council had been saved not by ancient powers, but by the very species the Council had once cast out. Refugees, smugglers, and outcast races began whispering about Earth's return. Some called it a myth. Others called it destiny. But one thing was clear, humanity was no longer hiding. On New Alexandria, Sato received messages from alien leaders asking for asylum, alliances, and trade. And with each new message, the foundation of the Stellar Accord, a new human-led alliance, grew stronger. But as hope bloomed in the shadows, the Council took notice. Spies reported strange activity on the galactic fringe. Lost systems were lighting up again. Refugees were vanishing from Council space, only to reappear on flourishing new worlds. In secret, Council leaders gathered in panic. They had thought Earth broken, but it had risen from them. ashes stronger than ever. And worse, they were winning the hearts of those the Council had failed. A decision was made. The human threat had to be ended before it spread. Mercenaries were hired, fleets were mobilized, and an ancient warrior species known as the Drakari were paid to hunt down Earth's colonies. But Earth was ready. As the part closes, Sato stands before a massive view screen displaying the Valari homeworld now wrapped in green, healed by human science. Her voice is calm but firm as she speaks to her officers. "We didn't choose this war, but we will finish it on our terms." Behind her, a new flag flutters, one not of Earth alone, but of all those who believed in a better future, one built not by the old powers, but by those once cast aside. The phoenix had risen, and it would not be burned again. The silence before battle always felt like the deepest void in space, but today it was different. In the orbit of Valari Prime, the once dying world that now glowed with restored life, Earth's fleet waited in formation, watching the stars for any sign of movement. Word had reached Admiral Reiko Sato through intercepted transmissions the Drakari were coming. Known across the galaxy as one of the most feared warrior species, the Drakari were not bound by law, only by contract. Their ships were built for brutal close combat, lined with plasma blades and armor strong enough to crash through orbital stations. They had fought for the highest bidder for centuries, and now the Council had paid them to strike at humanity. The human fleet was smaller, but better prepared. Each vessel had adaptive shielding, quantum communication links, and tactical AIs that could predict battle patterns in real time. But Sato knew technology alone would not win this fight. This was not just a defense, it was a message. The galaxy had to see that humanity would never again bow to fear. Meanwhile, down on Valari Prime, teams of engineers and medics continued their work, unaware that a storm was approaching. The Valari people had begun rebuilding their homes with human help, but even they sensed the unease in the air, a tension that vibrated through the ground like the first tremble of an earthquake. Then the sensors flared to life. Dozens of Drakari ships dropped out of warp in perfect formation, dark and brutal-looking, their hulls painted with ancient war symbols. The largest ship, known as the Bloodhammer, moved forward like a beast smelling prey. Sato stood on the bridge of her flagship, the ISS Valiant, watching the enemy advance with a calm expression. She didn't blink when the enemy hailed her, and the screen showed a Drakari warlord with armor made of bone and fire in his eyes. He laughed when he spoke, mocking Earth's small fleet, calling them outcasts pretending to be rulers. Sato simply replied, "You're not fighting the old Earth. You're facing what we became when the galaxy turned its back on us." Then she cut the signal and gave the order. The human fleet responded like a single living machine. Fighters burst forward in tight formations, using warp flicker drives to dodge and strike in the same breath. Capital ships unleashed EMP waves that disabled Drakari sensors, while stealth drones attached to enemy hulls and began uploading virus codes to shut down their weapons. But the Drakari didn't break easily. Their warriors launched boarding pods toward human ships, forcing close-range combat in narrow corridors. For hours, space lit up with the clash of fire, metal, and screams. Human soldiers fought back with precision, their armor equipped with gravity stabilizers and shock pulse rifles that turned ambushes into traps. On board the Bloodhammer, the Drakari commander began to realize this wasn't a desperate race hiding in shadows. This was an evolved force disciplined, deadly, and unified. As the battle raged, the Valari people watched from below. They had once seen humans as legends, the mysterious exiles who had returned to help them. Now they saw something more, liberators. Inspired by Earth's courage, young Valari took up arms and sent out signals to other enslaved systems, telling them what they had seen. Across the galaxy, small rebellions flared like sparks catching dry leaves. Refugee species, forgotten miners, enslaved laborers, they all began to whisper the same phrase, "The chains are breaking." Back in the battle, Earth's forces pushed harder. Captain Malik led a counterboarding on the Bloodhammer, cutting through the decks with plasma charges and facing the Drakari commander head-on. The fight was brutal, hand-to-hand, the kind that history remembers in statues and stories. Malik fought with the strength of someone who had seen his world cast aside, and now stood to defend something greater than flags or orders, a future worth building. When he finally struck the enemy down, the Bloodhammer's system shut down, and the remaining Drakari surrendered. After the battle, silence returned to space not from fear, but from awe. Earth had not just survived a Council-sanctioned attack. It had crushed it. And it had done so without turning to cruelty or conquest. Sato ordered all surviving Drakari to be treated fairly and released them with a message: "Tell your Council employers we are not your enemy, unless you make us one." As the damaged ships returned to New Alexandria for repairs, humanity's reputation soared. Species that had once hidden in the corners of space now sent messages of alliance. Some offered technology, others offered their loyalty, and some just offered gratitude. What the Council had meant as a warning had become a spark. The galaxy's underclass, it's rejected, it's broken, and it's betrayed, were looking to Earth not just as a survivor, but as a leader. The Stellar Accord began to form officially, its members bound not by race or history, but by a single belief that the future belonged to those willing to fight for dignity, justice, and truth. Back at Council headquarters, panic began to grow. Internal arguments broke out. Some members demanded a full military retaliation, while others hesitated, afraid that further action would only make the human-led alliance stronger. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council felt something unfamiliar: doubt. In secret, some Council species even opened hidden channels to Earth, asking for peace talks, not out of loyalty, but out of fear they might be next to fall. But Sato was patient. She knew Earth didn't need to rush. Every time the Council showed its weakness, more systems would drift away. Every time they tried to crush rebellion, another would rise elsewhere. And all the while, the Stellar Accord grew: one system, one people, one purpose at a time. Humanity had been exiled, yes, but in that exile, they had found clarity. They had turned broken trust into steel, silence into strategy, and isolation into inspiration. The chains that had once bound the galaxy were beginning to crack. And Earth, the world once dismissed as primitive and dangerous, now stood at the center of a movement that could not be stopped. As stars blinked in the void and the ruins of war drifted quietly through space, one thing became clear to all who watched: the age of the Council was ending, and a new dawn had begun. The stars seemed quieter in the weeks after the Drakari defeat, as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move in a game that had suddenly shifted. Across hundreds of systems, species once silenced began to speak, and worlds hidden under the weight of Council control started to stir. The Stellar Accord, led by humanity, grew stronger with each passing day, and whispers of rebellion turned into plans, alliances, and secret exchanges of technology. Earth had become more than a power; it had become an idea, a symbol of what could be built by those who had been ignored, betrayed, or cast aside. But not everyone was ready to accept this new future. In the deepest vaults of the Galactic Council's core world, behind locked doors guarded by silence and fear, a meeting was held unlike any before it. The High Speaker of the Council, a serpent-like being called Varric Cole, stood before 12 shadowed representatives of the founding species. Their faces were hidden behind ancient holographic veils, but their voices were sharp with anger. Earth's rise was not just a threat to their rule, it was a challenge to everything the Council had stood for over 10,000 years. Diplomacy had failed, force had failed, and now they turned to something older, something forbidden even by their own laws: manipulation from within. Thus began the Council's gambit, a plan not of ships or soldiers, but of shadows, lies, and betrayal. They called it Project Eclipse, a covert operation meant to destroy the Stellar Accord from the inside. The Council knew it couldn't defeat Earth through open war, so instead it would infect its alliances with mistrust. Agents were planted spies with false identities, carrying forged documents and twisted stories. Some joined as refugees, others as technicians or diplomats, and slowly, piece by piece, they began to spread doubt. Rumors were whispered into the ears of alien leaders that Earth planned to dominate the Accord, that its help came with secret chains, that its weapons could one day turn against its own allies. On the surface, life in the Accord continued to grow. Trade routes expanded, medical cures were shared, and new colonies were being built, but below that, cracks began to form. Disagreements broke out between members over territory and resources. Accidents started happening, explosions in mining stations, sabotage in communication arrays. At first, they seemed random, but Admiral Riko Sato knew better. She watched the data herself, drawing patterns from chaos. Every disaster had a common link: someone new, someone untested, someone who had arrived recently under the banner of peace. She didn't say anything publicly at first, not wanting to feed the Council's plan by showing fear. But in secret, she activated Earth's most advanced intelligence program, Project Ghostlight, a network of observation satellites, digital hunters, and AI-driven counterintelligence units designed for one purpose: to expose the invisible war. Among the Ghostlight agents was Alara Voss, a former hacker-turned-spy, known for once crashing a Council database with only a pocket console and a bottle of soda. Alara went deep undercover into a suspected sabotage cell on a remote Accord world. Posing as a technician, she discovered something terrifying. The Council wasn't just trying to break the Accord, they were preparing for something bigger. Hidden within encrypted messages, she uncovered references to an ancient weapon long believed to be a myth: the Obsidian Sun. According to the files, it was a planet-sized station built in secret ages ago by the first Council founders. It had the power to collapse entire star systems using gravity distortion fields, but it had never been used, locked away because its power was too dangerous. Now, the Council planned to reactivate it and use it against the Stellar Accord as a final solution. Alara barely escaped with the data, fighting through collapsing tunnels and Council assassins sent to silence her. She returned to New Alexandria with bruises, burns, and the truth. Sato read the reports in silence. The Council wasn't just playing politics anymore. They were preparing for annihilation. There was no time to waste. Sato called an emergency summit of all Accord members. Some came with hesitation, already poisoned by the Council's whispers. Others arrived angry, wanting answers about the recent accidents. But when Sato revealed the intelligence backed by proof, audio files, and Alara's recovered data, the room turned silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a Valari elder stood and said, "If this is true, then the Council does not just fear us, they mean to erase us." Slowly, the room shifted. Doubt turned to unity. Betrayal turned to rage. And for the first time, every Accord member voted together, without a single objection. The Stellar Accord would no longer defend itself. It would act. Sato's next orders were clear. A stealth fleet would be sent to find the Obsidian Sun and shut it down before it could be powered. But this mission would not be easy. The Council had hidden it in a starless region known only as the Dead Vale, a place where navigation systems failed and light itself seemed to vanish. Only the bravest pilots volunteered, those who understood this might be a one-way trip. Among them was Captain Malik, returned from his last battle with the Drakari, now leading a squadron of elite shadowcraft fitted with the latest cloaking tech. As the fleet launched toward the Dead Vale, the Council made its final move. A fake transmission was sent across the galaxy, showing a distorted image of Earth's fleet attacking a neutral planet. The footage was fake, but many outside the Accord believed it. Panic spread. Small alliances began to crumble. Markets collapsed. But even in the chaos, the Accord held strong. The truth had already been shared, and those who had once doubted now stood ready. In the Council's eyes, the gambit had failed. Their final weapon was now their only hope. Meanwhile, Sato watched from the command deck of the ISS Valiant, waiting for news from the fleet. Every hour brought more tension. And then, a whisper came through the quantum channel: "We found it. Obsidian Sun is real. It's waking up." The message ended, and the screen went dark. Sato closed her eyes for a moment, not in fear, but in focus. The Council had made its move. Now, it was humanity's turn. And as the stars watched once more, the final chapter of this silent war began to write itself, not with treaties or lies, but with courage. sacrifice, and the hope that even the oldest powers could fall when faced with the fire of the Exiled. I in the dark heart of the Dead Vale, where stars no longer shone and even light seemed afraid to wander, the elite fleet of the Stellar Accord drifted through silence like ghosts hunting a legend. They had found it buried deep within the shadows of a collapsed star system. The ancient weapon known as the Obsidian Sun floated like a nightmare left behind by forgotten gods. Its surface was jagged, made of black alloys unknown to science, pulsing faintly with energy that should not have existed. Massive rings circled it like broken chains, and within its core, strange lights moved in patterns no one could understand. Captain Malik stood on the bridge of the stealth cruiser Night Spear, eyes fixed on the beast before him. There was no doubt now. This was the Council's last plan, a weapon so powerful it could wipe out entire systems in seconds. Malik gave the order to begin infiltration. 3 assault teams launched in silent pods, landing on different parts of the station, each tasked with disabling the reactors before they reached critical levels. Time was short. Already, the weapon was beginning to hum, its systems waking from centuries of sleep. Back on Earth's capital moon, New Alexandria, Admiral Sato watched the transmission feed with growing tension. The Council had gone silent, likely believing the weapon would speak for them. But Sato had learned long ago that silence only means one thing: someone is hoping their enemy won't come back. As Malik's team entered the station, they passed through halls that twisted reality, where walls shimmered with ghost images and time seemed to skip. The Obsidian Sun had been built using pre-Council technology, crafted by the first builders, an extinct race who had vanished after leaving behind only terror and warnings. Strange markings on the walls hinted at something even worse, that the Council hadn't built this weapon, they had only found it, and planned to use it without understanding what it truly was. Inside the control chamber, a giant sphere of dark matter spun slowly, held by energy beams that crackled like storms. One wrong move could trigger a chain reaction that would not only destroy the Stellar Accord, but collapse the region of space around them. Malik's voice came through the secure channel, steady and calm. "We're going in. No backup. No retreat." The signal went quiet as his team began planting disruptors near the core. But the Obsidian Sun wasn't unguarded. As the teams moved deeper, defense drones activated, ancient machines that had not moved in 1,000 years. They attacked without warning, using weapons that pierced shields and distorted gravity. The soldiers fought with precision and courage, losing many but never stopping. One by one, each reactor node was disabled, forcing the core to enter standby mode. But before the final node could be shut down, an alarm triggered across all channels. A failsafe had activated. If not stopped in time, the Obsidian Sun would begin a countdown that could not be reversed. Malik ordered his team to evacuate while he stayed behind to disable the core manually. No one argued. They knew what that meant. He moved through the collapsing chamber as fire and metal rained down, reaching the central console and connecting his neural link to override the system. It was then he saw it not just a weapon, but a warning. Images poured into his mind, flashes of ancient wars, worlds destroyed not by choice but by fear, civilizations wiped out because power had replaced reason. The first builders had created the Obsidian Sun to protect themselves, but it had nearly ended them. Now, the Council had nearly repeated that mistake. Malik made the final override, and the countdown froze at 6 seconds. The station groaned, shaking like a beast in pain, and then fell silent. The Obsidian Sun was dead. Malik never left. The chamber collapsed moments after the shutdown, and his signal faded into static. The last thing he said was recorded across the fleet: "Tell them we stopped it. Tell them to never build monsters again." The fleet returned to New Alexandria carrying not just the news of victory, but the weight of loss. When Sato received the report, she stood in silence for a long time, staring at the stars beyond her window. Then she called for a final summit, not of the Accord, but of the Council. Using a secure channel, she sent an invitation to the Council's core world. The message was short: "The time for fear is over. Meet us, or be forgotten." For the first time in centuries, the Council agreed. They knew the Obsidian Sun had failed. Their agents were being hunted across dozens of systems. Their lies were no longer trusted. And worst of all, the people they ruled were beginning to rise. On the day of the summit, the Accord fleet arrived at the council's doorstep, not as conquerors, but as equals. Sato entered the hall of governance alone, wearing no armor, carrying no weapon, and faced the same chamber that had once exiled Earth. But she was not the same woman, and this was not the same humanity. The High Speaker tried to talk in riddles and old politics, but Sato raised her hand and simply said, "The galaxy has changed. You can accept it or be left behind." In the days that followed, dozens of systems declared independence from Council rule and joined the Accord. The Council still existed, but its grip had shattered. What had started as punishment had turned into power. What had been exile had become return. Humanity didn't seek revenge. Instead, they helped rebuild what the Council had broken. They offered peace, trade, and protection. Where the Council had ruled through fear, the Accord led with trust. Valeri Prime became the first new capital of the shared alliance, a symbol that even ruined worlds could rise again. Sato stepped down months later, letting younger leaders carry the torch, while statues of Moloch were raised not to glorify war but to honor sacrifice. The phrase he spoke before the reactor shutdown became a creed carved into stone across thousands of planets: never build monsters again. And so, the exiled returned, not as rulers, but as builders. The stars that once watched in silence now shone with unity. The galaxy had broken its chains, and at the center of that new hope stood Earth, no longer forgotten, no longer feared but finally understood.